the Lutheran Reformation is not just defined by, as I said at the beginning here, Luther's theology. So we don't subscribe to everything Luther said. But what does define a Lutheran doctrinally? This is the Lutheran Confessions. And the Lutheran Confessions are a series of documents that were written within the era of the Reformation that contain the doctrinal points that are adhered to by the Lutheran reformers. So if you want to know what a Lutheran believes, it's pretty easy. Just look at the confessions of the Lutheran Church. Now, I want to make one clarification here. A Lutheran, and we use the term confessional Lutherans, that's what I used to refer to myself, and oftentimes the phrase confessional Lutheran means I am a Lutheran, and what that means is that I adhere to the doctrine as laid out in these confessional documents. Something concrete and clear about what makes a Lutheran and what makes one not a Lutheran. And that is our doctrine, our doctrinal heritage, an affirmation of Lutheran doctrine. So you don't get to say, I'm a Lutheran, and then disagree with half the things in the Augsburg Confession. So you may think some things in Lutheranism are cool, but just by name, that doesn't really fit. You're something else. You're Anglican, because they don't have clear enough doctrinal statements. When we affirm the teaching here, what we're affirming is the doctrines contained in the Book of Concord, which is the book of our confessions. What we're not saying is that, if you're a Lutheran, you have to agree with every random historical claim or scientific claim. There is a weird thing about garlic and magnets that is just not something that we actually believe scientifically is the case. So you're not obligated to believe that to be a Lutheran, but it's the doctrinal points that are debated and the explanation of those doctrinal points. Those are the things that you are affirming if you are a confessional Lutheran. You're not affirming if a certain father is quoted by the Lutheran Confessions and modern scholarship has demonstrated that, hey, they attributed that treatise to the wrong guy, that you've got to say, well, but our confessions say it. I don't care what the evidence is. It's true. Because I have to affirm it. We're not talking about an inerrancy of the Lutheran Confessions, in other words. It's not that the Lutheran Confessions have no errors in any way at all, but what it is saying is that as a Lutheran, you affirm the basic doctrinal points that are set forth in these confessions. Okay, so maybe to make a quick differentiation here between two kinds of Lutherans that both adhere to confessions, there are those Lutherans who hold, especially in Germany, to the entirety of the Book of Concord, meaning that we affirm this whole set of documents that are confessions of faith. There are other Lutherans, however, in some other countries, who simply affirm the Augsburg Confession of 1530 and Luther's Small Catechism of 1529. And that doesn't mean that they totally disagree with these other documents, but not every church, and you have a number of state Lutheran churches, not every church affirms the entirety of the Book of Concord. Some places saw this the later document says, just a bunch of German controversies. So to be a Lutheran means that you affirm the Augsburg Confession and the Small Catechism. That's kind of the minimum, okay? Those are the most basic, clear statements of what Lutheran theology is. Everything else really depends on those two documents. It's an expansion of those two documents. So if you look at the whole of the Lutheran Confessions and say, this looks too overwhelming, there's so much here, read the Augsburg Confession and read the Small Catechism, because that's really going to give you the basis. Okay, so what are these documents? The Augsburg Confession. The Augsburg Confession is a confession of faith that was written primarily by Philip Melanchthon, though not only. It was not written by Luther. And this was a confession that was presented at the Diet of Augsburg before Emperor Charles, the same one that we had discussed at the Diet of Worms earlier. So in 1530, there was an opportunity for the Lutheran princes, because there are a number of princes that have converted at this point, along with theologians that are there, to present their faith and to be able to read it out loud publicly and declare to the emperor, this is what we teach. And largely, the purpose of the Augsburg Confession is to say, we are not departing from the Church Catholic. We're not bringing out all of these theological novelties. Even though they've been accused of all of these crazy heresies, they're saying, no, we're teaching what the Church Catholic has always taught. What we're arguing against is abuses that have happened in the late Middle Ages. So you have the Augsburg Confession, which it goes article by article, on all sorts of doctrines, it's the best place to start. Then there's the apology of the Augsburg Confession. Apology, not meaning you're sorry for it, but apology meaning defense, apologia. So this is the older way of using the term apology, like when we're talking about apologetics. Now, the apology is a defense of the Augsburg Confession written by Philip Melanchthon. So he's responding to Eck and his criticisms. There are others as well, but largely Eck, his criticisms of the Augsburg Confession, and clarifying and defending. So it's a further explanation of what the Augsburg Confession is saying. You have Luther's small catechism and his large catechism. Now, these catechisms were written right around the same time, but 1529, and they were written by Luther after what are called the Saxon visitations in Luther's life, where he goes throughout Saxony and visits a bunch of congregations to see what's being taught there, how are churches functioning. And he starts to see that there is a lack of education even among the priests over the basic things of the faith. I mean, he talks about how some priests have no idea what the Ten Commandments are. They can't name them. So Luther recognizes the importance of having documents that are going to outline the basic teachings of the Christian faith. And so you have the small catechism, which is written for children. It's supposed to be taught by the father at home with his children. So this is something that's supposed to be kind of a family activity. The large catechism then was written for pastors or other adults to use as catechesis. The large catechism is in a more paragraph by paragraph essay kind of format. It was really based on sermons, whereas the small catechism is a question and answer thing, which is meant for the purpose of memorization. So the small catechism is broken up into 5 basic sections. So you have the Ten Commandments, you then have the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, Holy Baptism, and the Lord's Supper. And so these are the basic elements of Christianity that even a lot of non-Lutherans look at the small catechism and say, yeah, this is a great summary of the Christian faith. It's not like the small catechism as written to be this polemical, debated text. It's just laying out the basics of the Christian faith. So then we have the Treatise on the Power and Primacy of the Pope. This is the most polemical of any of the documents, and it's against the abuses of the papacy, written by Philip Melanchthon in 1537. And also, speaking of polemical writings, the Smalcald Articles, written in 1537 by Martin Luther, deal with a lot of the contentious issues going on in the church. And this is a lot more blunt, I'll say, than something like the Augsburg Confession is, about the abuses that are happening in the church at the time. And it's at this point where it became obvious that Rome really does not have any desire for an actual in-person discussion, debate, council that was hoped for initially. At that point, the hopes for that had really been lost, and so Luther is a lot more direct there. I think without having those hopes that some kind of reconciliation is going to happen anytime in the near future, at least. Then we have these other 2 documents that were written in the 1570s. Now, these documents come out of some theological debates that happened after Luther's death. And this is true with any movement. When you have a significant figure that's leading that movement and that figure dies, the next generation is going to fight a lot about who's in charge and what did our other leader mean by certain things that he said and what direction are we going to go in now. So after Luther's death, Melanchthon is to simply not have, Melanchthon's a great scholar, he's a great theologian, but he does not have the kind of leadership capabilities of a Martin Luther. And so who was going to fill those shoes? Well, thankfully, we don't have this just line of, new Luthers, this line of, well, we've got to have our head guy who's really charismatic and a great leader to all just follow. We're not Mormons, with the prophet at the head of the church. That's a very unhealthy way for a church to function. So if there was just some direct line of people like Luther, it wouldn't have been healthy. But what we do have is a number of wonderful theologians that debate a number of issues and come together to write about what are some of the debated points. And so Martin Chemnitz and Jacob Andre are the most significant, though there are others as well. So they get together and write the Solid Declaration and the epitome of the Formula of Concord. And then all of this is compiled together in what is called the Book of Concord. So if you want all of these confessions by the Book of Concord. And in the Book of Concord, you'll have all of this. And oftentimes you'll also have some other little things, something called the Catalog of Testimonies in there, and some other things as well, which I just don't have the time to get into here.